Hello everyone. After the previous video, there was a comment from Martin. If you like, you can read the comment now on the screen. I'm replying just in order to say that not eating meat does not necessarily mean that one is more compassionate or spiritually evolved. The thing is that if I'd agree with such statement that associates not eating meat with spiritual evolution or with evolving as a conscious and compassionate being, then I need to justify first why it is okay for me to eat fruit and vegetables. Perhaps you don't believe that, but fruit and vegetables are also living beings that do breathe and eat and drink and grow and change and exchange and have consciousness that is aware of the environmental conditions and interacts accordingly. So if plants are living beings, then why it is okay for us to eat plants but not animals? Isn't that spiritual decline? According to such statement, there is no answer that can justify that unless you either don't agree that plants are living beings or we go back to my answer about eating meat. And here you need to re-examine your definition of what it means to be compassionate, because such statement only shows a sense of superiority that is either based upon overestimating the human capabilities or underestimating nature or the complexity of nature and the capabilities of other beings. And this is an understatement. The complexity of nature and consciousness is beyond our conception because we perceive only a fraction. It always makes me laugh when I hear about a teenager making a speech in the UN, broadcasted by the mainstream media and supported by the climate scientists, portraying this teenage activist as the savior of our billions of years old universe. And I think to myself, have they lost their minds? Are they that blind? Are they so arrogant and stupid, or someone is pranking me here? If we stop seeing the flesh as the container of spirit and stop seeing our life experience as consciousness contained in flesh and matter, and we start seeing it as flesh and matter contained by consciousness, we might start to have the spiritual experience in the center of the materialistic life by living in harmony with nature in order to access the divine. In the past, I gave an example in a video about divinity, whereas in order for a child to conceive math, he or she must perceive a tangible representation of numbers. It can be apples, potatoes, pens, people. So the teacher says an apple plus an apple are 2 apples. After that, the apple can be replaced with anything else, but the math stays the math. The teacher doesn't care about the apples here. They are not in the center of the debate. They are vain, but he uses them so that the student can hopefully access the divine code that is beyond the symbol. And later, when the student becomes an architect, he doesn't need to talk about apples anymore, but can talk about numbers directly, without the need of mediation. Even the written symbols of numbers are merely symbols, but for the architect, those numbers mean something else. They mean space, distance, placement, and then comfort, functionality, efficiency that makes the experience of the house more comfortable, more inviting, more attractive, less attractive. So in the end, it's also about spirit. So the architect won't say, I want to be superior to math by not biting on an apple. He doesn't care about apples while dealing with architecture. The apples were relevant only to the student in the first grade. And if the student wants to evolve in the context of math by talking about whether the apple is green or red, or big or small, in that context, that is so irrelevant to the context, and the teacher would understand that the student has not conceived the divine code beyond the symbol yet. Any conversation that focuses on the vain is a distraction from the divine. The apple is not the essence here. You might say if I cut the apple into 2 halves, that might trigger an interesting debate in the first grade, but within the relevant context. But the architect is already in a different place, away from any debate about apples in the context of math. He interacts with the divine directly. All symbolism in art and philosophy and architecture, all those are representations of divine codes, of divine spirits. However, when people worship the symbols and forget about the spirits and the divine, this is an indication to civilizational decay and nihilism. This is when art stops being a vessel that channels spirit of thought and emotion, and the debate becomes about the vessel itself. This is like when the student gets distracted by the object without conceiving the math. Also in finances, money is a symbol of exchange. It might be competence or efforts. People who worship coins and cash are those who are blinded from seeing and acknowledging what they actually represent. That is why they live in financial slavery, thinking all the time about their trade in the stock market, the whole day, or about whether they should buy gold or Bitcoin, but not thinking about what it means in the sense of production, human resources, service. They don't care. All they care about is their diagrams, is their coins, is their paper. So you think people can't exchange services and products without money? They can. The question is how long they need in order to set themselves free from this financial slavery, to open their eyes and see the truth beyond the paper and the coins. If someone is hungry, can he bite on gold or chew on cash? The food is value. Production and service are value. Cash is only mediation. That can be replaced with any other technology. When people are free and committed, the agreement between two parties is enough. No mediation needed. This is spiritual evolution. But we need the spirit of commitment and loyalty and trust in order to set ourselves free of financial slavery. The same thing when it comes to flesh eating flesh, or flesh eating plants, or plants eating flesh, or plants eating plants. Transcendence for me means to stop worshipping the symbols and start accessing the divine. Otherwise, being superior to the materialistic nature can happen either by not eating at all, and therefore quitting nature by one's death, or by transcending within the materialistic perception. But for this to happen, survival comes first, before transcendence. And I made a video about this. You know how many spiritual teachers and artists and philosophers and yoga teachers who live from the monthly transactions of their parents or from the welfare system, and then they tell themselves stories that it's okay and it has nothing to do with intelligence or wisdom or spirituality. But this is the first step, like the apple for the first grade student. They can't survive financially on their own. They are desperately dependent on others to sustain them. But they think very high of themselves and confuse everyone else around. Unfortunately, the Western civilization has enabled such a social experiment that has created a human species so arrogantly unaware of its incompetence, like disabled people connected to the infusion, but think of themselves as if they have the capabilities of Olympia champions. And if you are in Europe, this is a real pandemic. So before such people talk about transcendence, one needs to sustain one's own life first, in order to be sovereign and free of spiritual burdens, in order to develop sovereign and free thought. Until then, I can't debate with such a person about transcendence. People think that by not eating meat, they are morally superior, they are more compassionate, they are more spiritually evolved. No, my friend. It requires much more than that. Like those people whose lives have always been messy and out of balance, but now, finally, a piece of cloth on their mouth and nose makes them feel morally superior to the free ones. The system has enabled that, and now such zombie feels that he or she can preach moral superiority. They want you to see the mask as moral superiority because it is such a tiny price to pay for a huge distraction that exempts them from all the consequences of their miserable and messy lives and even portrays them as heroes, while only free sovereign people who are not sustained by third parties can see this as the cowardice and hypocrisy that it is, and denial and opportunism and spiritual corruption that they are trying to cover up. This is the truth beyond the symbol. Whether one eats flesh or not means nothing in the world of spirit. Everyone can see how certain substances influence them sensually and emotionally, but this is a very individualistic thing because perception is personal. So I can't generalize. Of course, I'm talking about natural food that is not manipulated by human beings, by chemicals and industrial substances. The manipulated and toxic food would influence the body and distort its perception by unnatural elements by definition. How about seeing the spirit beyond the flesh? How many times we talked about predatory relationships and emotional survival and narcissists and psychopaths? Why do we associate hyena with opportunism or sheep with obedience, or wolves with order? How about if we talk about vision? We talk about vision in the sense of sensual vision. How about spiritual vision? Who are those people that are easily distracted by their fears? They have eyes on the sights. They're always distracted. So they don't remember because they were never focused on one point, but rather scanning. You know this from people who forget so quickly, never remember crucial data. On the other hand, there are those who remember everything because their eyes are focused mindfully on one thing at a time. I'm speaking here about vision as something spiritual, not only sensual. And this is only one very simplistic example about the placement of the eyes, not about vision in the dark, about color processing, camouflage, and what all that means in the world of spirit. How many people are so easily distracted by race because their emotional vision cannot detect camouflage. So they give an idiot a key position because of his skin color and ignore solutions and salvations because they come from the wrong race or the wrong color. Of course, I use skin color and race because they are visible, and for many people they work as filters of reality. But not only vision, the other senses. What do the roots of the plants represent and their underground network and activity with other plants? What does the weather represent? The thickness of the skin, the speed, etc. Countless of natural phenomena that give us access to the world of consciousness that is beyond the vein. But we see a narcissist or a psychopath who learned all the tricks of how to look empathic and compassionate and spiritual, and he or she used those tricks in order to prey emotionally and spiritually on his or her environment. But all the enablers around think that he or she is a spiritual person because he or she don't eat meat. No, they can't hide behind the veil anymore and use virtue signaling to gaslight us. We see them in the world of spirit for who they are. There is a space for ethics and morality. I also talked about it in the past and would love to talk about it even more in the future. But we are living now in a time where such terms have been hijacked and perverted and taken out of context in order to serve the golden children of societies who have distorted the perception of their collective enablers to reframe reality and get away with their crimes. That's why I'm so glad we have 2020 and 2021 in order to reveal the hidden and clean all that. And when those parasitic factors are ousted after they abuse enough and poke too many dragons, I would love to come back and talk more about morality. Until then, I don't want my words to be confused with trendy virtue signaling where every golden child and enabler with a weak judgment has been given the feeling and the authority to talk about it. I hope I could shed some light on this. Thank you, Martin, for your comment. Thank you, everyone, for staying with me. I'm Shredy Jabarin. Ciao.